When it was the fifth night, Dunyazad asked her sister to finish the story, if she was not too sleepy. And Shahrazad said, I have heard, O fortunate king, that King Yunan accused his vizier of being jealous of Duban and wanting to have him killed. Then after that I would regret it, Yunan added, as King Sinbad regretted killing his falcon. Excuse me, your majesty, said the vizier, but how was that? Yunan went on. You must know that there was a Persian king with a passion for enjoyment and amusement, who had a fondness for hunting. He had reared a falcon which was his constant companion by night and by day, and which would spend the night perched on his wrist. He would take it hunting with him, and he had a golden bowl made for it which he hung around its neck, from which it could drink. One day the chief falconer came to where he was sitting, and told him that it was time to go out hunting. The king gave orders and went off with the falcon on his wrist, until he and his party reached a wadi, where they spread out their hunting cordon. Trapped in this was a gazelle, and the king threatened that anyone who allowed it to leap over his head would be put to death. When the cordon was narrowed, the gazelle came to where the king was posted, supported itself on its hind legs, and placed its forelegs on its chest, as though it was kissing the ground before him. He bent his head towards it, and then it jumped over him, making for the open country. He noticed that his men were looking at him and winking at each other, and when he asked his vizier what this meant, the man explained, They are pointing out that you said that if anyone let the gazelle jump over his head, he would be killed. The king then swore that he would hunt it down, and he rode off in pursuit, following the gazelle until he came to a mountain. There it was about to pass through a cleft, when the king loosened his falcon at it, and the bird clawed at its eyes, blinding and dazing it, so that the king could draw his mace and knock it over with a single blow. He then dismounted and cut its throat, after which he skinned it and tied it to his saddle-bow. As this was in the noonday heat, and the region was desolate and waterless, both the king and his horse were thirsty by now. The king scouted round and discovered a tree from which what looked like liquid butter was dripping. Wearing a pair of kid gloves, he took the bowl from the falcon's neck, filled it with this liquid, and set it in front of the bird, but it knocked the bowl and overturned it. The king took it and filled it again, thinking the falcon must be thirsty, but the same thing happened when he put it down a second time. This annoyed him, and he went a third time to fill the bowl and take it to his horse, but this time the falcon upset it with its wing. The king cursed it, exclaiming, You are the unluckiest of birds. You have stopped me drinking, and have stopped yourself and the horse. He then struck off its wing with a blow from his sword, and the bird raised its head as though to say by its gesture, Look at the top of the tree. The king raised his eyes, and what he saw there was a brood of vipers whose poison was dripping down. Immediately regretting what he had done, he mounted his horse and rode back to his pavilion, bringing with him the gazelle, which he handed to the cook, telling him to take it and roast it. As he sat down his chair with the falcon on his wrist, it drew its last breath and died, leaving its master to exclaim with sorrow for having killed it, when it had saved his life. So ends the story of King Sinbad. Great king, the vizier said, Sinbad acted out of necessity, and I can see nothing wrong in that. I myself am acting out of sympathy for you. So that you may realize that I am right, for otherwise you may meet the same fate as the vizier who schemed against the prince. How was that? The king asked, and the vizier said, You must know, your majesty, that there was a vizier in the service of a certain king with a son who was so passionately fond of hunting. This vizier had ordered to accompany the prince wherever he went, and so when he went off to hunt one day, the vizier rode with him. While they were riding, they caught sight of a huge beast, and the vizier encouraged the prince to pursue it. The prince rode after it until he was out of sight, and the beast had vanished into the desert, leaving the prince with no idea where to go. Just then, ahead of him, he saw a weeping girl, and when he asked her who she was, she told him, "I am the daughter of one of the kings of India, and while I was in this desert, I became drowsy. Then, before I knew what was happening, I had fallen off this beast and was left alone, not knowing what to do." When the prince heard this, he felt sorry for the girl and took her up behind him on the back of his horse. On his way, he passed a ruined building, and the girl said she wanted to relieve herself. He set her down, but she was taking so long that he followed her, only to discover that although he had not realized it, she was a female ghoul, and was telling her children, "I have brought you a fat young man today. Fetch him to us, mother," they said, "so that we can swallow him down." On hearing this, the prince shuddered, fearing for his life, and is certain that he was going to die. He went back, and the ghouler came out, and seeing him panic-stricken and shivering, she asked why he was afraid. "I have an enemy whom I fear," he told her. "You call yourself a prince?" she asked, and when he said yes, she went on, "Why don't you buy him off with money?" "He won't accept money, but wants my life," he told her, adding, "I'm afraid of him, and I have been wronged." "In that case, if that what you say is true, then ask help from God," she said, "for he will protect you against your enemy's evil and the evil that you fear from him." And that the prince lifted his heads towards the heaven and said, "God, who answers the prayers of those in distress when they call on you, and who clears away evil, may you help me against my enemy and remove him from me, and you have the power to do what you wish." After hearing the prince's prayer, the ghouler left him. He went back to his father, and when he told him about the vizier's advice, his father summoned the man and had him killed. "As for you, your majesty, if you put your trust in this sage, he will see to it that you die the worst of deaths, and it will be the man whom you have well treated and taken as a friend who will destroy you. Don't you see that he cured your disease externally through something you held in your hand? So how can you be sure that he won't kill you by something else that you hold?" "What you say is right, vizier, my sound adviser," agreed the king, "for this man has come as a spy to destroy me, and if he could cure me with something I held, it may be that he can kill me with something that I smell." Then he asked the vizier what has to be done about Duban. The vizier said, "Send for him immediately, telling him to come here, and when he does, cut off his head, and then you will be safe from any harm he may intend to do you. Betray him before he betrays you." The king agreed with the vizier and sent for Duban, who came gladly, not knowing what God the merciful had ordained. This was as the poet said, "You who fear your fate, be at your ease. Entrust your affairs to him who has stretched out the earth. What is decreed by fate will come about, and are you safe from what is not decreed?" Duban the wise came into the presence of the king and recited, "If I do not show gratitude, in accordance with part at least of your deserts, tell me for whom I should compose my poetry and my prose. Before I asked, you granted me favours that came with no delay and no excuse. Why then do I not give you your due of praise? lauding your generosity in secret and in public. I shall record the benefits you heaped on me, lightening my cares, but burdening my back. He followed this with another poem. Turn aside from cares, entrusting your affairs to fate. Rejoice in the good that will come speedily to you, so that you may forget all that is past. There is many a troublesome affair, whose aftermath will leave you in content. God acts according to his will. Do not oppose your God. He also recited, leave your affairs to God, the gentle, the omniscient, and let your heart rest from all worldly care. Know that things do not go as you wish. They follow the decree of God, the King. He then recited, be of good cheer, relax, forget your cares. Cares eat away the resolute man's heart. Planning is of no help to a slave who has no power. Abandon this and live in happiness. The king asked him, do you know why I have sent for you? No one knows what is hidden except for God, Duban replied. I have sent for you, said the king, in order to kill you and take your life. This astonished Duban, who said, why should you kill me, your majesty, and what is my crime? I have been told that you are a spy, answered the king, and that you have come to murder me. I am going to kill you before you can do the same to me. The king then called for the executioner and said, cut off this traitor's head, so that we may be freed from his evil doing. Spare me, said Duban, and God will spare you. Do not kill me, lest he kill you. He then repeated what I repeated to you. Ifrit, but you would not give up your intention to kill me. Similarly, the king insisted, I shall not be safe unless I put you to death. You cured me with something that I held in my hand, and I cannot be sure that you will not kill me with something that I smell or in some other way. Duban said, my reward from you, O king, is the reward of good by evil, and the king insisted, you must be killed without delay. When Duban was certain that the king was going to have him killed, he wept in sorrow for the good that he had done to the undeserving, as the poet had said. You can be sure that Maimuna has no sense, though this is what her father has. Whoever walks on dry or slippery ground and takes no thought must fall. The executioner then came up, blindfolded him, and unsheathed his sword, asking the king's permission to proceed. Duban was weeping, imploring the king, spare me, and God will spare you. Do not slay me, lest God slay you. He recited, I gave my good advice, and yet had no success, while they succeeded, but through treachery. What I advised humiliated me. If I live, never shall I give advice again. If not, after my death, let all advisers be accursed. Then he said to the king, if this is how you reward me, it is the crocodile's reward. The king asked for the story of the crocodile, but Duban replied, I cannot tell it to you while I'm in this state. I conjure you by God to spare me so that God may spare you. At that point, the king's courtiers got up and asked the king for Duban's life, pointing out, we have not seen that he has done you any wrong, but only that he cured you of a disease that no wise doctor was able to treat. The king said, you do not know why I have ordered his death, but this is because if I spare him, I shall certainly die. A man who cured me of my illness by something that I held in my hand is able to kill me by something that I smell. I am afraid that if he has been bribed to murder me, as he is a spy, this is why he has come here. He must be executed, and after that I shall be safe. Duban repeated his plea for mercy, but on realizing that he could not escape execution, he said to the king, If I must be killed, allow me a delay, so that I may return to my house, give instructions to my family and my neighbours about my funeral, settle my debts, and give away my books of medicine. I have a very special book, which I shall present to you to be kept in your treasury." "What is in this book?" asked the king. "Innumerable secrets," Douban replied, "the least of which is that, if you cut off my head, and then open 3 pages and read 3 lines from the left-hand page, my head will speak to you and answer all your questions." The astonished king trembled with joy. "When I cut off your head, will you really talk to me?" he asked. "Yes," said Douban. "This is an amazing thing," exclaimed the king, and he sent him off under escort. Douban returned to his house and settled all his affairs. And then the next day he came back to the court, where all the viziers, chamberlains, deputies, and officers of state assembled, until the place looked like a garden in flower. He entered and was brought before the king, carrying with him an old book together with a collyrium case containing powder. He sat down and asked for a plate, which was brought. He then poured the powder on it and spread it out, after which he said, "King, take this book, but don't open it until you cut off my head. When you have done that, set the head on the plate and have it pressed into the powder. At that, the flow of blood will halt, and you can open the book." The king took the book from him and gave orders for his execution. The executioner cut off his head, which fell on the plate, where it was pressed down into the powder. The blood ceased to flow, and Douban the wise opened his eyes and said, "O king, open the book." The king did this, but he found the pages stuck together, so he put his fingers into his mouth to wet it with his spittle, and with difficulty he opened the first, the second, and the third pages. He opened 6 pages in all, but when he looked at them, he could not find nothing written there. "Wise man," he said, "there is no writing here." "Open more pages," said Douban. The king opened 3 more, but soon afterwards he felt the poison which with the book had been impregnated spreading through him. He was racked by convulsions and cried out that he had been poisoned, while Douban recited, "They wielded power with arrogance, but soon it was as though their power had never been. If they had acted justly, they would have been met with justice, but they were tyrants, and time played the tyrant in return, afflicting them with grievous trials. It was as though here fate was telling them, 'This is a return for that, and time cannot be blamed.'" As soon as Douban's head had finished speaking, the king fell dead. Know then, Ifrit, that he had spared Douban. God would have spared him, but as he refused, looked to have him killed, God destroyed him. Had you spared me, God would have spared you. Morning now dawned, and Shahrazad broke off from what she had been allowed to say. Then it was the 6th night. Her sister Dunyazad told her to finish the story, and Shahrazad said, "If the king permits me." "Go on," he replied, and she continued. "I've heard, O fortunate king, that the fisherman told the Ifrit, 'Had you spared me, I would have spared you, but you wanted nothing but my death, and so now I am going to destroy you by throwing you into the sea, here, imprisoned in this bottle.'" The Ifrit cried out, "I implore you, in God's name, fisherman, don't do this. Spare me, and don't punish me for what I did. If I treated you badly, do you, for your part, treat me well. As the proverb says, 'You who do good to the evildoer know what he has done is punishment enough for him.' Do not do what Umama did to Atika." "What was that?" asked the fisherman. But the Ifrit said, "I cannot talk while I am imprisoned, but if you let me out, I shall tell you the story." The fisherman said, "Stop talking like this, for I shall certainly throw you into the sea, and I am never going to release you. I pleaded with you and begged you, but all you wanted to do was kill me. Although I had done nothing at all to deserve this, and far from doing you any harm, I had helped you by freeing you from your prison. When you did that to me, I realized that you were an evildoer. Be sure that when I throw you into the sea, if anyone brings you out, I will tell them what you did to me and warn them, so that he may throw you back again, and there you will stay until the end of time or until you perish." "Free me," pleaded the Ifrit. "This is a time for generosity, and I promise you that I shall never act against you again, but will help you by making you rich." At this, the fisherman made the Ifrit promise that were he freed, far from hurting his rescuer, he would help him. When the fisherman was sure of this, and had made the Ifrit swear by the greatest name of God, he opened the bottle, and the smoke rose up until it had all come out and had formed into a hideous shape. The Ifrit then picked the bottle up and hurled it into the sea, convincing the watching fisherman that he was going to be killed. The man soiled his trousers, crying, "This is not a good sign." But then his courage came back, and he said, "God Almighty has said, fulfill your promise, for your promise will not be questioned. You gave me your word, swearing that you would not act treacherously to me, as otherwise God will do the same to you, for he is a jealous God who bides his time and does not forget. I say to you what Duban the wise said to King Yunan, spare me and God will spare you." The Ifrit laughed and told the fisherman to follow him as he walked ahead. This fisherman did, scarcely believing that he was safe. The pair of them left the city, climbed a mountain, and went down into a wide plain. There they saw a pool, and after the Ifrit had waded into the middle of it, he asked the fisherman to follow him, which he did. When the Ifrit stopped, he told the fisherman to cast his net, and the man was astonished to see the pond contained coloured fish, white, red, blue, and yellow. He took out his net, cast it, and when he drew it in, he found 4 fish, each a different colour. He was delighted by this, and the Ifrit said, "Present these to the Sultan, and he will enrich you. Then I ask you in God's name to excuse me, since at this time I know no other way to help you. I have been in the sea for 1800 years, and this is the first time that I have seen the face of the land." After advising the fisherman not to fish in the pool more than once a day, he took his leave, speaking words of farewell. He then stamped his foot on the earth, and a crack appeared, into which he was swallowed. The fisherman returned to the city, full of wonder at his encounter. He took the fish to his house, where he brought out an earthenware bowl, filled it with water, and put them in it. As they wriggled about in the water, he placed the bowl on his head and went to the palace, as the Ifrit had told him. When he came to the king and presented him with the fish, the king was astonished, for never in his life had he seen anything like them. He gave orders that they were to be handed over to a slave girl who was acting as a cook, but whose skill had not yet been tested, as she had been given him 3 days earlier by the king of Rum. The vizier told her to fry the fish, adding that the king had said that he was testing her only in the hour of need, and that he was putting his hopes in her artistry and cooking skills, for the fish had been given him as a present. After issuing these instructions, the vizier went back to the king, who told him to hand the fisherman 400 dinars. After he had passed over the money, the man stowed it inside his clothes and set off back at home at a run, falling, getting up, then stumbling again, thinking that this was all a dream. He bought what was needed for his family and then returned to his wife in joy and delight. So much for him. But as for the slave girl, she took the fish, cleaned them, then after setting the frying pan on fire, she put the fish in it, and when on one side was properly cooked, she turned them on to the other. All of a sudden, the kitchen wall split open, and out came a girl with a beautiful figure and smooth cheeks, perfect in all her attributes. Her eyes were darkened with kohl, and she had silken keffiyeh with blue fringe. She was wearing earrings. On her wrist were a pair of bracelets, while her fingers were adorned with rings set with precious gems. And in her hand she held a bamboo staff. Thrusting this into the pan, she asked, "Fish, are you still faithful to your covenant?" At which the cook fainted. The girl repeated her question a second and a third time. The fish raised their heads from the pan and said, "Yes, yes," in clear voices, and then they recited, "If you return, we return. If you keep faith, then so do we. But if you go off, we are quits." At that, the girl turned the pan upside down with her staff and left through the hole from which she had come, after which the wall closed up behind her. The cook recovered from her faint and saw the 4 fish burned like black charcoal. She exclaimed, "His spear was broken on his very first raid," and she fell unconscious again on the floor. While she was in this confused state, the vizier came and saw that something had gone badly wrong with her, so much so that she could not even tell what day of the week it was. He nudged her with his foot, and when she had recovered her senses, she explained to him in tears what had happened. He was astonished and exclaimed, "This is something wonderful." He then sent for the fisherman, and when he was brought in, the vizier told him to fetch another 4 fish like the first ones. The fisherman went to the pool, cast his net, and when he drew it in, there were another 4 fish like the first. He took them to the vizier, who brought them to the cook and said, "Fry these in front of me, so that I can see what happens." The cook got up, prepared the fish, put the pan over the fire, and threw them into it. As soon as she did, the wall split open, and out came the girl, looking as she had done before, with a staff in her hand. She prodded the pan and asked, "Fish, fish, are you true to your old covenant?" At this, all the fish raised their heads and repeated the lines, "If you return, we return. If you keep faith, then so do we. But if you go off, we are quits."